My name is William Goff. My question today is, how did Taiwan go over 250 days without a COVID-19 case? My time for my speech will begin right now. Well-known author and influencer J.K. Rowling once stated, "We are only as strong as we are united and as weak as we are divided." If we take a step back right now and look at our community around us, or the society we live in, our country, our nation as a whole, or even the other nations of the world, we see a pattern throughout all of history. When our nation and other nations alike are not unified, when we see disunity and strife between people in the nation, that is when, like J.K. Rowling said, you start to see division and strife in the country. When we look at how we're doing right now in our communities and in other communities of the world, and how we've responded to COVID-19, how we've dealt with politics, and how we've dealt with problems rampaging our society right now left and right, we realize that sadly, we fall on the negative side of her quote. We see that we are disunified right now, and we are weak as nations of the world right now. But if we are to fall on the right side of this quote, and to find that we can come together and be unified and strengthen our nations and beat the coronavirus, we have to look around to countries who have done better than ourselves or better than our neighboring countries. Which is why my question today is, how did Taiwan go over 250 days without a COVID-19 case? And I believe that the answer clearly and simply is unity. Now, I believe this for 2 points. My first point today will deal with examples from other countries, and my second point today will deal with the Taiwan difference. So on to my first point. Let's look at a nation that's really close to home, as close as home as you can get, because you're standing in it right now. The United States of America. How did we deal with COVID-19 and what went wrong for us? Well, let's listen to the CDC. The CDC is constantly every day updating the news that it gives to the public and the research that it's discovering on COVID-19 and how we dealt with it. So when we look at the CDC's response to how the United States dealt with COVID-19, you see a pretty constant factor. They tell us that as a nation, we waited far too long to take this virus seriously. What we did as Americans is we looked around at the other worlds in our nation at the other countries around our nation, and we saw that, oh, there's a virus in China that we shouldn't have to worry about. Oh, well, the virus is now in Europe, but we're still fine, right? We're across the seas. But then what we saw is that the virus came to our nation and hit us like a train, because nobody in our nation was willing to listen to the science telling them to take the precautions that they didn't feel like doing. Because if we look back at the history of the United States, Americans are historically bad at one thing, and that's taking orders. That is being told to do something and not asking why, or not saying, you don't have the right to tell me that. And that's exactly what we saw with this pandemic. Americans were unwilling to wear their masks, unwilling to close their businesses, and unwilling to go home and social distance themselves from others, which is why we saw such a massive climb in the rates of COVID-19 in our country. But once we finally did take it seriously, then we saw the same thing happen. And that's because the CDC told us that we waited too long, and now that we are separated, we've hurt our immune systems and hurt our ability as a country to gain herd immunity. So if we take a scale today and put the United States on this side of the scale in response to COVID-19, what would fall all the way on this side of the scale? Well, I believe that according to Politico.eu, that would be Sweden. Sweden's response was far different from the rest of the world. What Sweden did is they decided as a nation to not necessarily fear the virus, but to control the virus in the way that they wanted to. They tried to reach what I had just previously mentioned as herd immunity. They decided to tell people, don't wear masks, do not close your businesses, and by all means, do not social distance. Because if we get this virus, we get it and get over it, we as a nation and a country and a people can reach herd immunity. Now, what herd immunity is when enough people in a nation reach the point of getting a virus to the point where everybody else is immune to it. Now, not everybody has to get the virus, and that's exactly what Sweden was trying to do. They had enough people in their nation that got the virus that we started to see the numbers of COVID-19 drastically drop. So while the rest of the world was fearing the virus and staying home, we saw that Swedish people were sitting in cafes, going on dates, meeting people that they hadn't seen in a long time, having school reunions, and carrying on as normal like we would see in America. The reason they did this is because they had that herd immunity. But why am I talking about them as a negative example today? And why do they fall all the way over here on the scale of COVID-19 response? Well, I believe that that's because after a while, we saw that that was not the solution. H.O. Mencken once said there's a simple solution to every problem: neat, plausible, and wrong. And when we saw the simple solution in Sweden, that ended up spiking the cases in the end. And now we're seeing lockdowns, and we're seeing Swedes that are fuming because of the way that they dealt with COVID-19 and the way that it's affecting their society. So among all of these Menckian simple solutions, we have this entire scale. So somewhere on this scale, there must be a right solution, right? Well, when we look at what happened, there is very few countries that actually did something right. And Taiwan is one of these countries. So that leads me on to my second point today, the Taiwan difference. Well, according to CNBC, on how did Taiwan beat the coronavirus, they tell us that there was simply something that Taiwan did that not a lot of other countries did. They won since SARS had COVID-19, or pandemic in general, precautions set in place. They were ready for this virus, and as a people were ready to take a stand against it because they didn't have their rights that were looming over their ability to help other people. They didn't have a mindset like Americans do or other people in other nations that I have to look out for myself and my property above the help that other people need. As a nation, they looked to their strong leaders, and they looked to the COVID-19 precautions that they already had in place and the rapid testing centers that they had already researched and already had in place for something like this, and they saw great success. Over the course of COVID-19, there has been 24 million citizens in Taiwan. There has been 451 cases and only 7 deaths. So when we look at the thousands upon thousands of deaths in our nation and in other nations alike, we see that Taiwan clearly did something right. And when we take this all the way back to what J.K. Rowling said, when we saw the unity that we needed in Taiwan, and we saw the unity that a lot of other places lacked, that is when we saw strength. And that is why Taiwan has gone over 250 days without a COVID-19 case. Former President Barack Obama once emphasized the fact that when seeking change, you can't wait for some other person, time, or thing to save you from your circumstances. He said that we are the ones we've been waiting for, and we are the change that we seek. When seeking to curb this virus and get it out of our nation, we have to look to others who heeded the words of Barack Obama. And when we look at Taiwan, we see that they really listened to what Barack Obama had to say, because they themselves became the change that they needed in the time that they needed, and they have been the change that they needed as a country. Thank you.